experience has taught me to be aware of philosophers who use the word exist and mathematicians who use the word probability. But taking the debate in the form that you've set it, it doesn't seem to me, with regard to one of the critical things like free will, that if you establish, as you have convincingly, that you can undermine a mechanistic, physicalist view of determinism by introducing the notion of indeterminacy in physical phenomena, which, so to speak, was already established by the general acceptance of quantum theory anyway, you then seem to me to be in exactly the same problem with regard to free will, because you have the connection between an intention and an action that ensues from it cannot be indeterminate or contingent. Otherwise, you have undermined the very notion of responsibility and agency. And if you undermine the notion of agency and responsibility, then you have no longer a language game, a form of life in which you can talk about moral responsibility, blame, guilt, etc. So it seems to me, yes, you can get rid of a historic, mechanistic view of determinism. It's not my fault because it's these actual physical deterministic things predictable in advance. You introduce physical indeterminacy into the brain, and then you've still got the problem of how you connect the intention that a human being has and the action that ensues from it as being something for which a person, and is that physical or not, responsible for the action which ensued, because what ensued was not human movement. What happened was human behavior, for which the connection between that cannot be contingent on the pain of losing the language game of moral responsibility.
I think it's very clear that we're only beginning to scratch the surface of how active information interacts with physical systems.
Yes, but that's an empirical response to a conceptual question.
Yes.
And no amount of empirical investigation is going to answer a conceptual...
Yes, the conceptual answer is, yes, our minds do influence how our bodies behave. We actually all know that. It would be almost impossible to live if we didn't believe that. But
there are several people stood at this podium in the last 2 months who have denied that absolutely.
Well, they may have claimed...
I suggest you throw a glass of water over them when they say that, see how they react to it.
That's my instinct.
I mean, I think it's fundamental. I mean, first of all with the arguments that Nick has produced this evening, we've been talking about, are creating a room for manoeuvre, showing that science has not established the causal closure of the world on its own restrictive reductionist terms. And that, I think, is an actual result, a clear result. That gives you a room for manoeuvre. If we're going to argue for the reality of human intentional action, and if we're going to argue also, incidentally, for the validity of human rational thought, I think, because I think too deterministic a theory destroys rationality as well as destroying freedom, then we'll have, I think, we won't be able to mount that from the bottom upwards because we just don't understand how mind and brain relate to each other. But I think we should just be bold enough not to deny what is almost all of us, I think, overtly or tacitly regarded as being a component, actual irreducible component of human experience. That would be the mast to which I would nail my colours.
Yeah. One brief comeback.
Sorry, you've set yourself, you've created a problem which philosophically I don't have, because I'm not trying to... You say that these two forms of ways of describing the world, these two language games, if you will, must somehow or other be rendered compatible with one another. I don't go there. I say the scientific way of describing the world is different from the moral and artistic way of describing the world, and I have no effort, no desire whatsoever to reduce either of them to the other.
Well, I don't want to reduce either to the other, but I'm a passionate believer in the unity of knowledge.
We're not trying to reduce but I think it is worth saying that just because we don't understand exactly how something occurs doesn't mean it doesn't occur. That obviously is a fundamental principle of science. If you didn't believe that, you'd never do any science. What I think we've established is that the genuine indeterminacy, which everyone knows exists at the low level, actually scales up to neural events. That destroys the argument from neurodeterminism, but how the mind and the brain interact in detail is something which hopefully will be a bit clearer in the next 50 years. It's very, very ill understood at the moment.